Hello Internet! I hope you're doing well today. Let's make some art, shall we? Today I'm going to be making the Hollow Knight from the game Hollow Knight. This is one of my most favorite games of all time. It's got an amazing art style, the world building is deep and cohesive, the music is incredible, the story is surprisingly tragic given its cutesy presentation, and the gameplay itself, of course, is very, very good. But let me take a moment here to talk about the story or lore of Hollow Knight, because I think that context is going to be important to understanding the character I'm sculpting today. In the kingdom of Hallownest, there's a dream plague running rampant, causing its citizens to go insane. This infection is caused by a powerful being called the Radiance. And the Hollow Knight was created to be a vessel to contain the Radiance and save the kingdom from destruction. But the Hollow Knight is failing, and the Radiance is breaking through. In the game, your job is to defeat the Hollow Knight and either take their place or enter the Dream Realm and fight the Radiance directly, ending the infection once and for all. When you fight the Hollow Knight, they weaken further, and if you do enough damage, the Radiance will start to leak out, and the Hollow Knight will ignore you completely and stab themselves repeatedly in the stomach to try and beat back the Radiance. This, to me, is so heroic and tragic that even as they're doing their best to fight us off, the Hollow Knight still cares the most about their duty of keeping the Radiance contained. Pretty heavy, right? But it's what spoke to me, and it's what I want to capture in this sculpture. So today, I'm going to be making the Hollow Knight. So here we go. I'm gonna start with an armature. It's just two 16th-inch aluminum wires coiled together in the middle, then wrapped all over with thin floral wire, just so the clay would have something to grab onto. Really simple and lightweight for flexibility. Then we start building the basic form. The Hollow Knight is described specifically as genderless, so I'm trying to make a kind of androgynous figure. Not too masculine, not too feminine, just something in between plus some insectoid vibes. I guess I should mention that every character in Hollow Knight is some kind of insect. All bugs, every single one of them. So yeah, insectoid vibes. The first head I made turned out to be way too big and I couldn't really size it down without a lot of work, so I had to remake another one. Yeah, off to a great start already, right? Because the Radiance's infection manifests itself in these orange pustules, I'm gonna add that to Hollow Knight's back, just because I think it's more visible and I can believe that it's coming out of the sword or nail wound. In Hollow Knight, swords are called nails for some reason. I don't know why, maybe it's because they're bugs carrying little human-sized nails as swords? Aluminum foil helps to save weight while I get the figure's action balanced. Once I'm happy with that, I can reinforce just the legs with 1/8-inch wire so I won't have to worry about the model falling over all the time. In my process, it's important to find balance with weaker armatures first because wires that are too thick can overcome the weight of the clay and create an imbalanced model. Now that I have the form and the action sorted out, I can start sketching in the design of the Hollow Knight themselves. I'm not committing to anything just yet, I'm just checking out the concept and the silhouette more than anything. The only thing I know at this point is I'm going for something medieval-ish since Hollow Knight is basically bugs with swords and armor. I tried sculpting the Radiance physically breaking out of the Hollow Knight's back. It doesn't happen in-game, but it's something I wanted to try because I thought it might do a better job of communicating the story behind the sculpture. But to be honest, it looks hella goofy. I really wanted this idea to work, but it just looks bad. Maybe I could have made this work if I had tried something different, but I think it's better for this sculpture if I just stuck with the plain infection pustules. Thing is, the story I'm trying to convey is so complex. You have to know that there's a kingdom hit by a plague caused by the Radiance, and that the Hollow Knight is a vessel to contain the Radiance, and that they're failing. It's a lot. Too much for this one sculpture if you don't already know the backstory. But also, the problem is I'm starting to develop what this idea would be like if it was done in my own characters. Should I spend the time on this and possibly exhaust that idea? Or should I just give up on this and put all efforts towards that idea that I'm starting to feel more excited about now? I should do a little explaining. If I were to do this as my own character, what I would do is, first of all, change the Hollow Knight out to like a human knight. And instead of infection pustules, I would have whole another character trying to escape out of the knight's back, as if it was an evil spirit that's possessed him, but he's trying to keep the spirit contained within him so that it doesn't go out and do horrible things to other people. If I go through with the Hollow Knight as is, maybe I won't want to do the other idea anymore. If you're an artist yourself, you can probably relate to this to some degree. When you do a piece, you have something that you want to express, an idea, a feeling, an emotion, something that you want to like get out, right? And once that thing is out of you, like you're done. You don't need to do that anymore. But I've really wanted to do Hollow Knight for a really long time, and I don't want to give this up. Oh man, I'm so conflicted. I'm so conflicted. Well, okay, let's look at it this way. I don't want to start another sculpture today, and I don't want to destroy this one to make the other one because the proportions are all wrong. Based on the circumstances then, I think I'm just gonna take this one to whatever place it's gonna end up being and tackle the real idea some other time. And with that, I'm committed. I'm doing the Hollow Knight for realsies. But you already knew that. I'm just showing you what I was experiencing as I was sculpting this thing, you know? Hollow Knight fans will have noticed by now that I'm not following the original design closely at all. In fact, I'm doing something quite different. That's because I wanted to do this as my take on the character rather than just following an established design. It's just more interesting for me as an artist. So, being that the game takes some amount of inspiration from Dark Souls, I am gonna do the same. I'm going for medievalish armor, but with the plates being a part of the Hollow Knight's body instead of armor that they wear, just like bugs have carapace armor on their body. One thing I'm not putting my own spin on is the cloak. I think the Hollow Knight's cloak is iconic and a huge part of the visual language of the whole game, so I definitely want to include it here. I'm doing this by putting in a worm of clay at a time to kind of draw in the major cloth folds and bunches, almost like I'm drawing outlines with a pencil, then filling it in later. I'm using the paper towel as a rough guide for where the main folds of the cloak are. Like all things, there are pros and cons to this method, but you know, for the most part, it works for me. Of course, even with the reference, I'm not getting this right the first time. I had to do several passes on the cloak to slowly bring in the shapes and adjusting them in smaller and smaller detail as each pass proceeds. This cloak really is the main technical challenge for this sculpture, and it's something I'm quite proud of in the way that it looks. I can even sense myself improving from previous sculptures, which is something that's always nice to notice. I decided to go with red clay for the infection pustules because I thought it might be nice how it stands out from the green clay on the Hollow Knight's body. There's no rhyme or reason to the way I'm placing them down. I just started with the big bubbles first, then fill in the gaps with smaller ones. I just wanted a variety of different sizes, just like how natural bubbles would form. And because the pustules also have these black veins in-game, I wanted to do that as well, but in my case, they're green. I thought they added some nice organic feel and additional contrast to the bubbles. I just had to be careful and keep the process nice and neat and not mix the colors. Okay, now I'm working on the hands. For some strange reason, I decided to detach the left hand at the wrist to get better access at sculpting both hands on the sword hilt. And it did give me access. But the problem is, it also made realigning the hands and wrist impossible. I tried this so many times, and if the wrist lined up, the sword hilt didn't line up, and if the hilt lined up, the wrist didn't line up. It was just impossible with the cloak in the way. Basically, I did this in the wrong order. I should have done the arms, hands, sword, get them all solid before putting the cloak on. But the cloak was such an integral part of the design, I could not imagine holding off on the cloak and doing it later than when I actually did. So I just had to bite the bullet and cut the cloak open to get access to the hands. And wouldn't you know it, it was super easy to do as soon as I cut off the cloak. I was able to line everything up instantly. I don't know, maybe cutting the cloak open is the right method after all. I have no idea. While I had this open, I also added tiny infection pustules to the entry wound. I think it adds a nice bit of context to the back bubbles and helps illustrate that the bubbles are coming from inside the Hollow Knight themselves rather than growing out of the sword. And easy as that, we just close the thing back up. But the problem is, this wrong order of operations thing really messed me up mentally. And as much progress as I've made so far, this screw up made me second guess everything. And I gotta be honest, I'm a little stressed out right now because I don't know what to do next. I need to fix the cloak. The front here is wrong for a number of reasons, but this area in particular is kind of problematic. Clean up his head, do the shoulder pads, the sword, and I need to do the armor trim. There's a lot to do. I don't know, I just don't know what to do next. It's definitely not the armor trim. I guess I can do the cloak or the head. When a sculpture is in a state where there's like a checklist of things that I need to do in order to just finish it off, usually I'm just like knocking them out. In this case, the order of operations kind of matters, and like screwing up by doing the hands after the cloak really has like spooked me a little bit. Let's do the cloak. I just gotta pick something. The best thing to do is get in motion and stay in motion rather than sitting around and overthink what I should do next. Just do something. Something is better than nothing. So let's just do something. And something I did. There's a fair bit of adjustments to be made to the cloak to get it looking right. That little dangly bit in front was not falling straight down, for one thing, and the folds on the main piece of cloak was a bit oversimplified. The changes aren't major. I felt like all the big shapes are in pretty good, well, shape. But this is the stage where I feel like all these little adjustments add up. A little shave here, a little add there, all of it contributes to making the whole piece just that much better. And even though it's the most time-consuming part, I think this is really worth the effort. Now I'm refining the head's finish, cleaning it up nice and smooth. I did add red clay to the eyes like I did with the bubbles. It makes sense for the story. The Hollow Knight is so full of radiance infection that their eyes are glowing with it. It's a nice effect, I think. Now I'm going to add some trim to the armor. These noodles are a harder grade of clay that I pushed through a fondant extruder. I'm going to line all the edges of the armor with this to create some nice sharp edges. I'm also putting in these depressions on the armor just to add some beaten metal looking textures to the plates and differentiate the body from the smooth head, like how in game the head is white and the body is black. Also, I think the texture is reminiscent of beetle shells, so that's also a nice bonus. And yes, I did this to every single armor plate. Every one that I can reach, I added trim and texture. It is very tedious, and just these trims took over 7 hours to do. I know this because I recorded all of it. Then the sword, or nail. It's just some hard clay on a wire, and the little markings on the blade were made using these steel dishes I had laying around. Then just stick it in, finish off the exit point, and we're good. And lastly, I'm just roughing up the hem of the cloak to make it more tattered and worn looking. Really easy, just carve away, and before you know it, you got yourself a tattered cloak. Okay, I think I'm just about done with this guy. Mostly, I don't know. It's been so hard to tell. It's been such a weird sculpture. Even when I sort of landed on what it is now, it's just like, I don't know, man. I feel like I never really fully understood what I was trying to accomplish with this piece. In that sense, it's kind of a failure as a sculpture. I mean, like, I learned a lot from doing this, and it's kind of cool looking, but I don't know. I don't quite understand why I'm dissatisfied with it. Maybe I'll figure out what it is after some time, but I don't know. Like, you guys let me know what you think. I feel like this is not quite up to the standards of the other pieces. Not in terms of like technical stuff, but like I just feel like artistically, this one is not really like up to my standards or something. I don't know. But anyway, so if I can't figure out what else to do with it, then I guess it's done. So now I just have a little cleanup to do and brush the whole thing in an alcohol solvent wash to clean up the surfaces a bit one last time, and we're done. Anyway, I'm just gonna show the rest of that in a quick time lapse, and then we're off to the final reveal. So I will see you after that for the closeout. Is what I would have said if I didn't just decide to paint this thing. I've got some pastels, paints, brushes, a palette, all kinds of goodies here. The reason I don't usually paint my models is because when I imagine sculptures, I tend to imagine them in clay color, not like a painted, you know, colored thing, whatever. I imagine my sculptures in black and white, basically. But being that this is an established character with an established color scheme, it just feels incomplete without the real colors on. Even though I tried to make it feel a little more complete by adding different clay colors and whatnot, it just really felt like this really need the final color scheme. So that's what we're gonna do, is paint. So here we go. I'm gonna start with black primer because this character is mostly black anyway, so I can save some time instead of painting white primer or even gray on and then do black on top. This is very nerve-wracking, by the way. I haven't painted anything in at least 15 years, and there is no undo button. I can't even take the paint off because the clay is still soft and will stay soft forever, being that this is oil-based clay. After the primer is done, I'm dry brushing the armor with a deep blue, followed by a subtle layer of gray. You can barely tell it's on right now, but I just wanted to add a little bit of dimension to the armor while having it still read as black. I do this first because it is the messiest step. Next, I'm putting down some base colors on the cloak, infection bubbles, and head. The black primer is kind of biting me in the ass here a bit because I had to do a few coats of everything to get the colors to properly cover over black. I didn't like the cool gray of the cloak, so I corrected it here. I had to do it twice actually because the first correction was still too cool for me and I wanted something a little more like warm gray. Here I'm doing a little cleanup on the black veins on the infection bubbles and the crack in the Hollow Knight's head, just trying to get the edges nice and clean. For the connective tissue between armor plates, I went with gray followed by a brown wash to add some depth and to give some color contrast to the blue-black armor. I started with a coat of gray on the sword for some reason that I do not understand. There's no point to this because I wanted a white blade, not gray. I'm going with white because when the Hollow Knight is shown at full power pre-infection, they had a white blade, and I think for me it helps to unify the palette by matching the head. Some quick paint on the eyes to match the bubbles, and then I'm gonna work on the underside of the cloak, which I'm going with a dull brown over gray, again for color contrast, hopefully to keep the model from being too monotone. Now I'm starting to pastel shade the piece. Basically, I take some color powder from pastel chalk and brush it into the recesses of the cloak. It's a little bit hard to tell what's going on, but the darker recesses add a lot of depth to an otherwise flat gray color. It's really easy to do and very friendly to an inexperienced painter like me. For the little horns, I'm adding contouring almost like I'm applying makeup. The effect is subtle, but it adds a lot to the dimensionality of the piece. A little shading on the blade to keep it from being too flat, and some very light gray on the head to knock down the brightness of the white paint finishes off the pastel step. Now I'm highlighting the infection bubbles to be a more yellowish orange while keeping the deeper orange visible to add depth, especially around the veins. While I was highlighting, I got some paint on the black veins and ended up liking the effect, so I put orange spatters all over the whole thing. I think it makes the bubbles feel more violent in a good way. Then I sprayed the whole thing in a matte varnish and added some gloss varnish to the infection bubbles. I think it adds a lot to the final finish and makes the bubbles look way grosser than before. Lastly, some orange infection goo on the blade and a gloss varnish on top of that, and we're good. I have no idea what I'm doing here, by the way. I started painting some lines and I thought it looked dumb, so I just smeared some paint around and I guess that looked okay? I definitely should have studied some blood on blades pictures before attempting this. And that is it for this sculpture. Stick around for the final reveal hero shots coming up shortly. Before I run that, I just want to thank you for watching. I hope this has been interesting for you, even though it's kind of a strange one from me. Hollow Knight fans, please don't judge me too harshly, and I will see you next time.